Wisconsin Eye is at the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. Why are we here? Because the state budget authorized 102 new audit positions, which could bring an additional $88 million, and it also authorized an additional 11 agents who could, when they're fully trained, bring in an additional $37 million. So thank you, Revenue Secretary Rick Chandler, for sitting down with Wisconsin Eye to talk about the budget. Thank you. I almost made you Transportation Secretary, but you're Revenue Secretary for the second time.
Yes.
Now, here's what intrigues me. When I look up the FTEs of DOR, you have about 1,000 employees. So you're going up about 10%. Give us the thinking there, Mr. Chandler.
One of the key things we do at the Department of Revenue is to audit tax returns. We have a lot of positions that process tax returns, a lot of positions in the customer service area that answer questions from taxpayers about their returns, but we also have positions that audit returns, and basically that's because the vast majority of taxpayers voluntarily meet their tax obligations. They want to know that we're checking to make sure everybody is meeting their obligations. So we have audit positions. We've had in the past a little less than 300 positions in that area. The budget initiative, as you mentioned, added another 102 positions, auditors and related staff. And that's because we looked around the country, looked at other states, in particular our neighboring state of Minnesota, and saw that there were some things being done by other states that we weren't doing as far as checking up to see whether taxpayers were meeting their obligations. We did have a trial project in the last biennium that tested some of the approaches that we thought might be worthwhile, and found out that that resulted in some increased collections above and beyond the costs of collection. And so in the budget we proposed to add 102 positions to do some additional auditing. These positions will be focused on auditing out-of-state corporations in several areas, corporations and other types of businesses in several areas. First of all, we want to go out and see whether businesses have a connection to Wisconsin, which means that they should be filing tax returns here. Secondly, we want to look at sales tax payments. When people are making sales into the state, are they reporting all the sales that would be subject to our sales tax laws? Are they correctly categorizing the products and services that they sell so that they're paying sales tax where they should be? And the other area is the apportionment of income area. When a business is doing business in Wisconsin and in other states, it should be reporting its income depending on how much of its business it does in each of those states. We want to make sure they're reporting the appropriate share in Wisconsin. So we will have the additional audit positions that will focus on audits of those out-of-state businesses, and we project it will result in a net revenue increase over a 2-year period of about $88 million.
What intrigues me is, as you said, the state has had about 300 auditors. How did you decide to make a recommendation of a 1/3 increase, going from 290 to 300, up an additional 102? Why 102?
Yeah, in large part it was just based on looking at other states and just trying to determine, and again based on our trial project, trying to determine what the appropriate level would be. But Minnesota, which is a state similar in population to us, very similar tax structure, similar economy, has a lot more audit positions than we do, or has had in the past. And we did spend some time talking to people there about how they conduct business, and based on that, based on our trial project and looking at other states, we did think it made sense to add the positions.
Is this a concession, Rick, that DOR's efforts in auditing really have been not up to other states, or we haven't been auditing enough, sir, in the past?
It's really an evolving thing. As the economy changes, as our ability to do certain things in the audit process changes, we're constantly adjusting what we do, how we do it, how many people we have. So we think at this point in time, again, based on the experience we saw in other states, we think that it makes sense to add these positions. And the legislature, after taking a long, hard look at it, agreed that it would make sense.
Now, of these 102, how many will be based in Wisconsin? Because you guys have, of course, offices in Milwaukee, Chicago, and the Twin Cities. So what's the percentage that'll be outside the state, do you think?
Yeah, we have offices in Madison, of course, Milwaukee,
Certainly.
several other cities in Wisconsin, in the Twin Cities area, in the Chicago area. We're still determining, based on how we go about the hiring, exactly what the mix will be, but it'll probably be 50% in Wisconsin, 50% in other places.
DOR, it's been several years, but DOR had an office in New York City for Wall Street. Do you contemplate going back to a New York City office?
That's not part of the current plan, but again, we're constantly looking at things. We do work with other states. We cooperate with other states in doing audits, share information. So we are constantly evaluating what makes sense.
Oh, and the average new auditor, once she or he is fully trained, how much do you anticipate they could bring in, generate a year?
Currently, our auditors, on average, generate about $850,000 a year. We're projecting for these new auditors, because they will be focused on probably some larger businesses, it'll be a little more than that, a little over $900,000 a year. But there's a broad range. That range will go anywhere from probably $600,000 a year up to $6 million, and that's because we audit big businesses, smaller businesses. Some areas involve bigger dollar amounts than others. So the averages are the figures I mentioned, the 850 currently, the roughly 950 under the new proposal, but there's a very broad range within those averages.
What's a message to some of these businesses that will be audited? And one thing that I was intrigued by, in the May Fiscal Bureau paper, it says that some of these businesses have not been audited by the state of Wisconsin. I was surprised to see that. Is that a widespread problem?
That's part of what we're looking at here is, we audit all large businesses that do business or that are located within the state. We audit on a somewhat random basis smaller businesses in the state, but businesses that are outside of the state but have some connections here. This is where we think we have an opportunity to do more. Part of this also is based on information technology. We have much greater access than we've had in the past to records that somebody sitting here in Madison can look at records for a company that's outside the state, whereas in the past we might have had to actually physically go outside the state to look at its records. And there are much more sources of information about what businesses are doing. So we're aware of more businesses that are doing business in Wisconsin than we were in the past, and that's why we think there's it makes more sense to focus some more resources on those audits.
Is there a message here to businesses that have a nexus in Wisconsin? You really ought to go back, because the State Department of Revenue is increasing its auditors by 1/3, so you really should take WIS DOR pretty seriously in the future here, more seriously?
Well, we would hope that everybody is doing that already, but to the extent that people maybe haven't been as careful as they should be and are aware of the fact that we're going to be putting more resources in, maybe some of them say, hey, look, we better go double check whether we're filing everything we should be filing.
Are these businesses being notified of the additional audit efforts that are gearing up?
That'll be an ongoing thing. I mean, we've got a very systematic process of identifying which businesses should be subject to audit, and this is where the information that we have is much greater than it was in the past, with our ability to access electronic records and a larger variety of sources of information. We've got a data warehouse that includes information from lots of different transactions, and we can use that to select which audits make the most sense and which audits will be the most productive in terms of the amount identified compared to the resources we invest. So that's all part of the whole process.
How does DOR, talk about the process of hiring 102. Do you just advertise, and what's a training period, and how long does it take these auditors to get up to speed?
Yeah, we're very aggressively recruiting right now. We're in the process.
Have you started hiring?
We're in the process of interviewing and hiring. We'll start training of the new auditors in October, and they'll start doing their work in 2016. In some areas they need more training than others, but some of them will be starting in January of 2016 doing their work.
What are you looking for when you hire 102 auditors? What level of experience?
Well, we're looking at all levels of experience. I mean, we've advertised in the Chicago area, the Twin Cities area, and in Wisconsin. So we're looking for people with experience, either in other public sector organizations or in the private sector. And we're also looking for new people who are just starting their careers. So we're looking at people at all levels.
The Fiscal Bureau paper says that, like other state agencies, you lost a lot of veteran auditors, right? Why? Just people getting at the end of their careers?
Yeah, I mean, that's a syndrome throughout state government and really throughout the economy. Is a lot of organizations hired a lot of people during the hiring of the baby boom generation, and particularly in state government. State government was expanding quite a bit in the 60s and 70s, hired a lot of people who were baby boomers starting their career. Those people are reaching retirement age now, and this has been an ongoing issue that we've been dealing with. Is as those people leave, we know we've got to bring in new people and get them trained, and this is part of that process.
How long does it take to train an auditor to be really fully productive?
It really varies by the types of audits they're doing. It takes longer, obviously, for the big, sophisticated businesses. Doesn't take as long for other things. So it's really hard to generalize.
Okay. Now let's talk about the agents. What's the justification for hiring 11 new agents?
Well, I should probably talk a little bit about the background of the state debt collection program. And I'll even take a step back. For many years, the Department of Revenue has run a program called the Tax Refund Intercept Program, TRIP. If somebody owes money to another state agency or to a local government that has signed up to participate in the TRIP program, if they're owed money by somebody and that person has a tax refund coming, we will intercept it and pay that money to the organization, the agency, or local government that the person owes the debt to. So the TRIP program has been in place for a number of years. The State Debt Collection Program, SDC for short, was initially authorized in the 2009 budget under the prior administration, and we started implementing it shortly after that, and it's been going now for a little more than 5 years. But what that program does is say that if there's a state agency or a local government that has a debt that's owed by somebody, they can sign up with us and ask us to help them collect that debt using the tools we have. We have tools to collect tax debts that involve things like looking at people's bank accounts or other assets, or looking at their sources of income and attaching those. So that helps us collect tax debts, but under the SDC program, it also allows our staff to help collect debts owed to other organizations. And state agencies participate, University of Wisconsin campuses, technical colleges, and a wide range of local government entities all throughout the state. We have more than 135 government organizations that are currently signed up, and more are signing up because they see it as a good thing. They can get debts that they're owed and help them collect revenues that they should be getting. So that program has been ongoing, and we proposed in this budget to expand it by adding 11 staff. Basically, we're just responding to the demand that's there. We're responding to the agencies and the communities that say they'd like to sign up for this program. So it's just a continuing evolution.
How much is owed all those state and local governments? Do you have a figure?
I'm not sure we have a figure overall, but in recent years we've been collecting somewhere around $13 million a year, probably a little more than that in the most recent year, and the projections are that will increase as we add the additional staff.
If you're adding 11 agents, that's to a baseline number of FTEs of how many? 7. 7?
Yeah.
So you're more than doubling that.
Yep.
Okay. Do they have the same skill sets as auditors? Or are you trying to hire the same type of
It's somewhat different skill sets. These are people who have to have skills in tracing people's assets, looking at their sources of income. But we've had good success with hiring those people, so we think we should be able to do that.
And whatever they collect, now we're talking about the agents, that's split between the local governments and DOR?
We have a 15% collection fee on that. So we collect that fee as our compensation for administering the program to pay our costs, and then the actual amount of the debt goes to the state agency or the local government that is owed the money. And actually here, it's interesting, when this program was initially authorized back in 2009, it was also based on seeing the results of a similar program in Minnesota. That program had previously been running. They'd had some success with it in Minnesota, so people here in Wisconsin thought it made sense. And it really has been operating very smoothly. It started in 2011, and it's been systematically ramping up since then. And as I say, very smoothly. The organizations that participate are pleased. There hasn't been any controversy about it. One of the questions that comes up is people say, well, aren't you, going to be too harsh and squeeze people too much? We will work with people. We will identify people's levels of income, look at what their assets are, and talk to them about what kind of payment plan makes sense. We don't want to drive anybody into bankruptcy or create unnecessary disruption in their life. But if they can't pay the whole amount of the debt right away, we'll enter into payment plans with them. And that process has gone along very well. So it's a program that has operated very smoothly, and we just think this is a sensible expansion.
What are the rules governing the agent's conduct? In other words, they don't call people in the middle of the night, do they?
No. I mean,
It's not like a debt collection agency, right?
It is. There are some similarities.
The goal is getting money.
There's a stereotype about that probably is undeserved in most cases about how debt collectors go about their business. But this is very professional. We work with the debtors, but it's only fair to people who do pay their debts to government agencies that everybody who has a debt pays it as well.
I'm intrigued because Joint Finance, when it passed the budget, they added a provision that DOR would have to report back on the collection efforts of both, I think, the auditors and the agents?
Yes.
And the governor vetoed that. Why did DOR recommend a veto, and if so, why?
Well, we're going to report to them. It's just we're not the issue was, I think, just some of the details of how that would work. But we'll be reporting to them. We provided them with lots of information about how the program is currently operating, and we'll provide information in the future. Okay.
We're coming up, I think, in January on the 10-year anniversary of the Delinquent Taxpayers website, which is shaming is the common name. You haven't been Revenue Secretary for the whole time, but has that website generally worked? How's that? There's names of businesses up there. There's names of individuals up there. Are you pleased with it? With it?
Yes, we think it's worked well, and that was not a Department of Revenue initiative. That was a legislative initiative. Senator Lissay and others who supported it as well. But they came up with the idea. We've implemented it, and we think it's worked well. It is just one other way in which we let people know that there are taxpayers out there who do have delinquent taxes, and both the fact that it results in some publicity for the taxpayer motivates some people to pay. In other cases, people see the name of a delinquent taxpayer up there and let us know that they know where that person is, or know where some of that person's assets are. So it has resulted in an increase in our collections above the projections, well above the projections that were initially made.
Well, initially, everybody went there to see if their name was on it and their neighbor's name was on it. So you still get people turning in their business, maybe their bosses or neighbors and stuff, you do?
Yeah, there's some of that, and again, some of it is just because people, when their name goes up there on the website, they want to get things cleared up.
Okay, so that's worked.
Yeah.
So you're a believer in that.
Yeah, no, and as I say, it was not our idea, it was a legislative idea, but it has really worked well.
Will the agents be working with those whose names are on that Delinquent Taxpayers website? Excuse me.
I guess I would say they've been doing that on an ongoing basis, and that's part of what we do, so it all works together.
Okay. A couple other general topics. The discussion nationally about making internet retailers pay the sales tax. Now, there have been efforts in Congress and in Washington, but they've never passed. You've been Revenue Secretary here for more than a full term. Are we seeing more compliance with internet retailers paying Wisconsin sales tax than when you came in January of 2011?
We are. I think we estimated in the past that roughly 50% of sales that were made over the internet were subject to tax. Now it's more than that. And there have been some notable people, people probably are aware of the fact that Amazon didn't used to collect tax on sales into Wisconsin because they didn't have a presence here. They now have constructed a fulfillment center in the Kenosha area. They have a presence here. They're collecting sales tax. And more and more retail organizations are getting to the point where they have both bricks and mortar operations, internet sales operations, and to the extent they have a physical presence here, they're starting to collect. Now, as e-commerce sales go up, there continue to be sales that where people owe tax, but the merchant doesn't collect it, so they should be paying use tax under the law here in Wisconsin, which is the same as the law in every other state that has a sales tax. And some people aren't, but more and more of those transactions are being addressed by the sales
Any
tax
estimate
provisions.
of compliance, the number of internet sales that Wisconsin is getting sales tax on? Do you think you're up to 20% or 40%?
You know, we don't have specific information on that because when people file a sales tax return with us, they don't identify whether those sales are brick and mortar or internet related. We do think we do have an estimate of around 150, 160 million a year of revenue that we think we forego because taxes aren't being collected on some sales. There still are some merchants who aren't collecting, some out-of-state merchants who aren't collecting sales tax on sales into Wisconsin.
Do you have the ability, does WisDOR have the ability to enter into discussions with some of these internet retailers to get them to pay? Or is the answer addressing this on a national level? Should Congress act?
Well, some out-of-state retailers who don't have a presence in Wisconsin do voluntarily collect, but beyond that,
Voluntarily, the key word is voluntarily.
Beyond that, it's a question for Congress to deal with. The Supreme Court has made that clear that it's an issue under the Interstate Commerce Clause. Congress has the power to require out-of-state sellers to collect, but individual states don't unless they have a physical presence.
Do you think then, are you one of those that think Congress should step in and make the rules mandatory for everybody?
It's a really, I guess, complicated discussion at the congressional level, so I'll leave it with them.
If your estimate is that Wisconsin is losing 150 to 160 million, my question is, are we losing more or less than, say, 5 or 10 years ago?
It probably is getting to be a little bit more each year, but again, when you've got people like Amazon who are starting to collect, that figure is probably increasing more slowly than the overall volume of internet sales.
Well, here's a personal example. I just made an Amazon purchase for about $55, and they tacked on, $3 and some cents. So do I have to report that on my, no?
Nope, they would have collected the sales tax.
Oh, they did. They did. I paid
yep,
it.
Yep.
Okay.
So.
Now, okay, let's talk about tax collections in the future. What percentage of Wisconsin taxpayers are now e-filing?
In terms of individual income tax returns, it's around 85%, which is just amazing considering that e-filing has only been in place for about 20 years. Mm-hmm. It goes up every year, so about 85% and more for people in businesses. Businesses e-file their sales tax returns as well as their income tax returns.
Well, in this era of, I'm going to use the H word, hacking, are you concerned about, now we have major corporations and even the federal government, the Office of Personnel Management. How worried is WisDOR about hacking?
Oh, it's a major issue for departments of revenue all across the country and for the IRS. And we've been working very hard on both anti-fraud efforts and on cybersecurity efforts. But in the anti-fraud area, we implemented a couple of tax seasons ago a quiz mechanism so that if we see an e-filed return, which we think has certain characteristics that may mean it's a fraudulent return, we'll ask the person who filed the return to answer several questions which only the real taxpayer would probably know the answer to. And unless they can answer those questions, we won't send out the refund. We may request some additional documentation. But we figure we blocked somewhere in the area of 50 million in fraudulent refunds in the last tax season through that mechanism. But the problem is growing. The hackers, the fraudsters are becoming more and more sophisticated. So we're looking at additional things we can do in the next tax filing season. We're talking with other states. It's a big problem for the IRS, so they're working at it, on it at the federal level. And it's just something we're going to have to pay a lot more attention to. One of the things that we're trying to explain to people is that in some cases this may mean that refunds go out more slowly. We had gotten to the point where if you e-filed a return, we would get you your refund in a week or two. And for most taxpayers, that is still the case, but in some cases, we're going to take a little more time to make sure that's not a fraudulent return that's being submitted. And we're telling people that. We're telling them that refunds may take a little more time because we're putting these procedures in place. And I think people accept that. In fact, people are glad that we're taking those precautions. And it really is, we've got to protect the taxpayers overall, the taxpaying public overall, from having state dollars sent to people who shouldn't be getting them. And we've got to protect each individual taxpayer, because if somebody files a fraudulent return in your name and we pay out the refund, you're not going to get your refund when you file your return yourself, and you're going to have to go through a lot of procedures to reestablish things and to get your refund authorized in the future. So we really need to do everything we can to stop it, and people understand that.
Do you think cybersecurity is the biggest thing you're worried about in the future of tax collections?
Yeah, and I've been talking about the anti-fraud efforts. We also have cybersecurity concerns, protecting people from hacking into our databases here at the Department of Revenue. We put a lot of emphasis on it with our employees because, as you indicated, people can name all the different companies that have been subjected to hacking attacks. So we emphasize to people, you have to be careful what links you click on. You have to be very careful with the people you're dealing with to make sure they're people who are who they say they are. So we're putting a lot of emphasis on that.
Have you received any numbers? Do you think the internal systems here do hackers try to get in 2 and 3 times a day or a week or something? Have you heard any numbers?
Oh, we have thousands of attempts to get in. Our information technology people monitor those things.
Thousands a year?
Thousands a month.
Thousands a month?
Yeah, of people trying to get in. And the scary thing is that if you have even one of those succeed, you've got a problem. So that's why we really emphasize it to people. We are doing things to encrypt our databases. We have systems in place that will block somebody from sending an email out or sending a document out if it's got information in there that shouldn't go out, like Social Security numbers. So we are putting lots of effort into it, but it's scary because you've got to really have 0 accidents, 0 slip-ups, or you could be in trouble.
Has that been DOR's record? Have you had any breaches?
We haven't had any breaches recently, and we just, we're doing everything possible to try to make that the case in the future.
The caveat is recently. Since when?
Well, we had an incident a few years ago where, and this was very, very small in scope, but we inadvertently released a few Social Security numbers in a database that's used by real estate professionals. So it went to a very limited number of people, and it was a file buried within a file. But if something like that happens, we're required by the statutes to disclose it, and we offered credit monitoring to those people. That was a very small-scale incident, but we want to do everything possible to prevent anything like that in the future.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I'm going to go back to tax collections with this question. For the first time in Wisconsin history, we collected more than $1 billion in the corporate income tax. Do you think that was because of an economic recovery, or is DOR getting better at collecting corporate income taxes?
It's primarily due to the economy.
It is.
When corporate profits are up, our corporate tax collections are up. When they're down, when profits are down, our collections are down. More and more businesses are doing business these days as pass-through entities, subchapter S corporations, limited liability corporations, where actually the business income is taxed to the owners on their individual returns. So despite the fact that more business income is being taxed at the individual income tax level, we still saw that large figure for corporate tax collections, but that's primarily based on how the economy goes. Some of it is based on what we do with our auditing.
Okay, then maybe a final question. With DOR hiring 102 new auditors, should taxpayers be even more diligent in terms of filing? And what's your takeaway message?
No, we hope people are diligent. The vast majority are. And I think a message to people in the state is that you shouldn't think that because we've got more auditors, your chances of being audited are going up, or you're going to face a heavy-handed audit procedure in the future. These are really focused on out-of-state businesses in a few areas, and we actually are trying to do things with our audit process to provide more education to taxpayers, to reduce the time it takes for audits, to focus on the key issues rather than smaller issues. So we're doing a lot of things to make the audit experience better for those taxpayers who go through it, but most taxpayers don't go through audits. Most comply voluntarily, and so for most people this is something that we're dealing with a number of out-of-state companies on, but not something that's going to personally affect them.
Very good. Revenue Secretary Rick Chandler, thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye, giving us the update.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.